welcome to Otaku no Video. Thanks for joining me as always. Today I'm here to talk about A Drifting Life by Yoshihiro Tatsumi. This is a big book. Yeah, massive, and it's all manga. I mean, this is all one big manga story. This is the autobiography, a manga autobiography, of the guy who started the Gekiga movement. What's Gekiga, you asked? Ha, glad you asked. Sherman's had the Wayback Machine for end of World War II. The manga industry in Japan was very much kid-oriented. It was pulling itself out of the mire of the war. Things were cheap. Things were cheap in every respect. And along came this guy named Osamu Tezuka, who was doing these very cinematic, very big, bold stories. And he was in the right place at the right time, and he just exploded onto the screen. Everyone loved his stuff. You can look at any manga artist who got started after World War II, and they will without fail say, Osamu Tezuka was one of my primary reasons for getting into manga, including this guy. Tatsumi got into manga because he was a huge fan of Tezuka. Tatsumi was a teenager during the end of World War II. So this starts at that time, late 40s. Tezuka is coming onto the scene, and Tatsumi is picking up Tezuka's works and starting to read them and starting to get inspired, and he starts drawing his own manga as a teenager. And this follows his life from that up till about 1960. Now, what that means is that this massive volume here is a history of three things. It's a history of Tatsumi himself, what he actually went through, autobiography. It's also a history of the manga industry and how it grew and changed over that time. I mean, this is what was the foundation for what manga is today, which as a result is the foundation for what anime is today, because so much anime is based on manga. So this is how manga grew from basically comic strips in newspapers into a serious art form. And Tatsumi was at the vanguard of this as it happened. It's also a history of Japan from, again, the end of World War II to about 1960. During the Great Golden Age, the great expansion of Japan and the economic miracle, and how Japan, actually it's not about how Japan pulled itself up out of that, it's about what happened during that period. He intersperses little notes about stuff that was happening in Japanese pop culture at these various points in his life. You know, movies that were coming out that were super popular, sports stars, just major events throughout the course of that time, and how Japan was changing throughout the 40s and 50s, which is interesting in and of itself. Now, where he went with manga is what's really the kind of interesting thing about this, because he got together with a bunch of other manga artists, and they founded this thing called the Gekiga movement. And their idea was, okay, before Tezuka, all manga were basically little children's stories. They were like, you know, newspaper comic strips, you know, Calvin and Hobbes kind of stuff, which is fine, but they were all just simple, goofy. Tezuka came along, and he broadened the scope to be able to tell big, you know, action-adventure stories, more movie-style stories. But his stuff was still fundamentally very family-friendly. And so it was still telling, I don't want to say the same kind of stories, but it was still very kid-friendly stories. The Gekiga group wanted to move beyond that. They wanted to tell serious stories about gritty, dark life. They were telling, you know, noir adventure stories, you know, mysteries, dark, murder, blood, revenge, guns, all that kind of stuff. And were quite controversial at the time, and there were quite a few letters to the editor about their work. But they felt that this was how manga was going to evolve. Tezuka actually reacted quite strongly against the Gekiga movement initially, and then ended up incorporating a lot of that into his own work, especially with stuff like Phoenix and Buddha. Anyway, so Tatsumi ended up in the middle of this, kind of ironically, because as he portrays himself at least, he was never much of a big leader. He just drew a lot of manga, and he believed very strongly that this is where, this is the kind of manga he wanted to draw, and this is the kind of manga that his friends were drawing anyway, kind of. And so he said, let's really push the envelope here. And so they started this movement to really push things forward. Now, what's amazing is within this book, this huge book, he explains quite clearly what he means by this Gekiga style. He shows you literally, visually what he's talking about, which is very cool. And to a great extent, this changed not only Japanese comics, but also American comics. You'll see a lot of American comics now basing a lot of their style off of what Gekiga changed in manga. And obviously, certainly, I mean, all the serious stories that we see now in anime that we've seen since the 80s, or even the 70s, late 70s maybe, in anime, were born out of Gekiga. I mean, Gekiga came out in the late 50s, early 60s, and even into the 70s. And so that really pushed anime. Anyway, getting back to the story. His style is kind of unusual if you're not used to it. I mean, it's very simple. I'm not complaining here, but it's just actually a cover thing. But he's basing this off of his style when he was doing all his manga, which is good because when you're doing a 800-page autobiography, you want a simpler style. So it's easy to read. It just zooms along. It's actually part of the Gekiga style, is to be very easy to zip through. So it is, really easy to read. Now, and I should mention, I mean, I say it's simple, but there's also stuff like this. I mean, he has draftsmanship. My main complaint, if any, with this is that this is very much a series of events in Tatsumi's life. So you'll get just little bits of things that happen, just little moments, and it just kind of cuts from that to the next thing. There's not as much time spent crafting this into a story. It's just little windows into his life going along. So I found it a little choppy, but that is kind of the nature of autobiography a lot of times. And that's just the way he decided to tell a story. It's not bad. It's just different, and it's just not the way we tend to tell stories. Anyway, that's really my only complaint. I mean, this is really easy. It's very well translated, very clean. Lots of fun stories, some goofy bits here and there. Just regular, everyday kind of comedy stories. It is, again, it's the amazing thing. It's really about his just sort of everyday, day-by-day drawing, doing stuff, but then seeing the world around him change. And seeing manga, the manga industry that he is a very major part of, change, partly as a result of what he's doing. And not because he's going out demonstrating on the streets, but because he's working, and he's putting out these magazines, and he's writing letters and doing things. And out of this, kind of organically, almost naturally, really, comes this sea change in how his industry and really the world works. So that's kind of the amazing thing. I zipped through this in a relatively short period of time. It took a while. But this was just really easy to read, really interesting. Not for everyone, certainly. I mean, there's no action, really. There's no adventure. The suspense is all in, how well will this magazine do? How well will this work out? What's going to go on with his brother? Stuff like that. So it's very slice of life in that sense. But if you're at all interested in the manga industry and the manga in general and how it evolved, interested in Japanese history, how Japan evolved, and just in a really affecting and, I want to say, thought-provoking, and just very intimate, personal life story, A Drifting Life.